What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today I thought I'd do a quick video on how I installed a Holley adjustable fuel pressure regulator on the D100 project. This is a project that I have been putting together to run fuel injection, but it's going to be getting a carburetor to do the initial engine break-in and to run until I can actually get fuel injection. Keep watching. My plan for the D100 has always been to go fuel injection. So when I tore the gas tank out and put in a ram charger tank under the bed in the back, which I'll link to that video up here, after installing that tank, I plumbed in new fuel lines and I installed an external fuel pump and fuel filter in the frame rail back by the tank. I'll also link to that video up here. Now that pump puts out about 75 psi, but with the engine being at the machine shop, and once I get it back I got to run it through a break-in period, and when you install fuel injection it needs to learn as it runs. So I'm thinking that I want to do the engine break-in period on a carburetor. Now I have the Carter carb that was on the engine when I pulled it. Works good, ran just fine with that Carter on there. So I think I'm going to do the engine break-in period with the Carter. The only problem is now I've got 75 psi of fuel pressure going into that carburetor, and that's probably not the best. So I went ahead and installed a Holley adjustable fuel pressure regulator. And the Holley fuel pressure regulator that I installed is a 12841. I'll link to that down below. That's an adjustable bypass fuel pressure regulator. So when it comes to fuel pressure regulators, there are really two types. More than two, but for this application, there are really two types of fuel pressure regulators. You have a non-return, which is basically a deadhead fuel pressure regulator, where it takes the fuel pressure coming into it, adjusts it to anywhere depending on your application and what your settings are and what fuel pressure you need. It takes that incoming fuel pressure regulator and regulates it to whatever your needs are. Now, nothing wrong with that, but that can cause some issues. Probably the biggest one being vapor lock, because that fuel coming into the pump or into the regulator, whatever's not being used has nowhere to go, and therefore it heats up. So I decided to go with a bypass fuel pressure regulator, and what that means is the 75 psi coming in gets regulated anywhere from 4.5 to 9 psi. It comes preset to 7, which is about right for a carburetor, but it actually has a return line or a connection port available for a return line. That way any fuel that's not being used gets routed back to the tank, thereby keeping a constant circulation of fuel and keeping your fuel running cooler. So here you can see the fuel pressure regulator. I installed it on my firewall, and that fuel line on the left side actually comes down and connects up with the feed line from the tank, and then that line coming out the bottom is the return back to the tank. Now I also went ahead and connected up a fuel pressure gauge on the front of the regulator, and then right there on top, that nut and screw coming out of the top is actually your fuel pressure adjustment. And that blue capped port on the right side of the pressure regulator, once I get the engine installed, that will go to the carburetor. So it's really that simple. Now I'm able to take that 75 psi coming out of the pump, regulate it down to the required 7 psi by the carburetor, and I don't have to worry about overpressurizing the carburetor. Now, these fuel pressure regulators, you can install them before or after your carburetor. doesn't really make that much of a difference. It all depends on your application and how you're setting your system up. For me, it was just easier to install it now, plumb it before the carburetor. That way I can have it pre-plumbed in, just gotta run the one line to the carburetor and be done. But again, it doesn't matter if you go before or after the carburetor. And once I get the engine broke in and I decide on what fuel injection system I want to go with, whether it be Holley or Phytech or whoever, all I got to do is remove the fuel pressure regulator and build the fuel line to go from the fuel connection at the frame rail up to the throttle body injection. And it's done. So that's really about it. Super simple, short video, not really a how-to, just to kind of show you guys an option out there if you want to take your project from fuel injection to carburetor. This is something you're going to need to do that. You're going to need to regulate your fuel pressure. So thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll catch you on the next one.